everyone, it's Katie from Paradise Falls family. In this video, we'll be taking you through our stay in San Francisco, California in August 2022. This was our second visit to San Francisco, but our first with the kids, and we all had a great time. This visit was part of a longer road trip around California, and we'll cover our other stops in separate vlogs. In this video, I'll talk you through what we did day by day in San Francisco to give you an idea of how we spent our time as a family, and then later I'll go through some of the more practical bits and what went into our planning. Our time in San Francisco came at the end of our road trip, and we began the morning in Yosemite National Park at the Tenaya Lodge Hotel. We knew we had quite a drive ahead of us, so we had a quick breakfast in our room, packed up and got on the road. The journey time to San Francisco is roughly 3.5 hours. However, we wanted to make a few stops on the way, some of which were a little out of the way, so the total drive time was going to be around 4.5 hours for us. Our first stop was in Fairfield, around 3.5 hours away and north of San Francisco, to visit the Jelly Belly factory. This is something the kids really wanted to do, and as we all love Jelly Bellies, we couldn't resist, even if it wasn't directly on our route. After a brief stop for lunch at a roadside McDonald's, we arrived in Fairfield and the factory around mid-afternoon. It's a really affordable activity. Adults are $7 and children are $3. This includes the museum experience, factory tour and train ride. The self-guided factory tour talks you through the process used to make the candy. It has some fun interactive games for kids along the way, as well as fun anecdotes and exhibits dotted around. In the main visitors centre there is a nice cafe and a great shop where the kids enjoyed stocking up on car snacks and presents for their friends back home. We then headed across the car park to a further exhibition. There's a fun little train that runs you around the car park to the building, which younger kids will enjoy. The exhibition inside again talked through the company's history and evolution of the years, as well as there being another shop. All in all, we spent around an hour at the factory and the kids had a blast. It was definitely worth the detour and it's something we'd recommend if you're in the area. Fairfield is also quite close to wine country, so we had intended to carry on to Napa, but with time getting on, instead we decided to head back towards San Francisco. First though, we had a few more stops to make on the way, in and around Oakland, just over the bay from San Francisco. The first was just a quick curbside stop. Oakland is home to Pixar Studios, and given we were in the area, we couldn't resist stopping for a quick picture at the gate and to take a peek through the fence. We were able to pull up just outside, take some photos, and we spotted the famous Pixar ball and lamp statues on the property. We then headed around 10 minutes down the road to Fentons Creamery. Fentons is featured in our favourite Pixar film, Up. This film even inspired our channel name. This was apparently included because a lot of the animators used to take their lunch here when making the film. We got a spot in the small car park at the back of the restaurant and we had our tea and of course some lovely ice cream for dessert. The food was delicious, it was great quality, lots of choices, and we all really enjoyed it. And with that, we headed on into San Francisco, driving in over the iconic Bay Bridge, enjoying the fantastic views over San Francisco and the Bay. It was a relatively easy drive through the city to Fisherman's Wharf where we were staying. We'd booked 3 nights at the Fisherman's Wharf. When we'd visited previously, we stayed at the Handlery Hotel on Union Square, but decided Fisherman's Wharf was a better location this time for the things we wanted to do. It also crucially had its own parking garage, which we wanted for our stay. We'd booked a deluxe room with 2 queen beds for around $900 for the 3 nights, and we were really happy with our choice. The hotel was in a great location, had great facilities, and the rooms were spacious and of a really good standard. There was plenty of space in the underground parking garage, but as with all San Francisco parking, this was so expensive at around $50 a day, so please keep this in mind. After a good night's sleep, we were up early to make the most of our time. We had a quick breakfast in the room and then we'd pre-booked a movie tour of the city for 9:30 a.m. Greg and I have seen the city before and we wanted to try and get around while giving the kids something they'd enjoy. We settled on the San Francisco movie tour, booked through Viator. We met our guide on Fisherman's Wharf and for the next 3 hours our guide took us all over the city to places we perhaps wouldn't have reached otherwise, showing us sites featured in movies and TV shows. This included downtown, the Presidio, Haight-Ashbury, the Castro, Nob Hill, all over the city. There were a couple of opportunities to get off, including at Fort Point, the Presidio, the Mrs. Doubtfire House, the Painted Ladies Houses in Alamo Square Park, and the Full House, and our guide was always happy to take photos and even amended the route to find everyone's favourite films and shows. Movies and shows featured in the tour included Ant-Man, Shang-Chi, Full House, Mrs. Doubtfire, Bullet, Dirty Harry and The Princess Diaries. The kids enjoyed this a lot more than a standard sightseeing tour. Having the clips play on our bus and then being able to see the actual locations outside of the windows was brilliant. The tour was driven and guided by the owner of the business, a local and a lovely man, and we definitely recommend this to anyone wanting to see the city. The name of the company is San Francisco Movie Tours, and we'll link this in the video description below. Afterwards, we grabbed a quick lunch at Applebee's over the road at Fishermans Wharf and then made the short walk back to our hotel to jump in the car. We headed out over the Golden Gate Bridge, which was an experience in itself, and we spent the afternoon out on the Marin Headlands. Our first stop was Battery Spencer, an old fortification just on the other side of the bridge, with amazing views back to the city over the bridge. You may recognise this view from countless films and pictures over the years. The journey itself was around 25 minutes, not long, and well worth it for these spectacular views. There were a few small parking areas at the site, but it does fill up quickly, so be prepared to wait around if necessary. There are also a few good walks out on the headlands, for example out to the Point Bonita Lighthouse. We didn't have time on this occasion, but it's definitely one for our next trip. Our next stop was around 25 minutes further along, and it was the Muir Woods National Monument. We wanted to visit this site last time we were in San Francisco, and we ran out of time, so it was a must-see this visit. The drive out here was really easy, with plenty of parking and facilities at the visitors centre. There are lots of different walking trails around the woods of varying lengths. We chose the shortest option on this occasion and spent just under an hour wandering among these amazing trees. We also picked up the Junior Park Ranger activity packs from the visitors centre, and the kids loved completing these as we walked, and we all had a great time. The walk itself was really easy, paved all the way and with fantastic scenery. To break the journey back, we stopped for tea in Sausalito, a lovely little town on the bay with views back over to the city. There are plenty of parking down by the water, and we wandered along the main street window shopping before we settled on tea at the Napa Valley Burger Company, which was a great spot. The food was excellent and the service even better. We'd highly recommend this restaurant. Driving back out of town, we were able to see some of the famous houseboats and some of the lovely houses in this wonderful part of the world. It took us around 20 minutes to get back to our hotel. Time was pressing on, but there's always enough time for chocolate, so we wandered up the road to the Ghirardelli chocolate experience for some treats, before having a quick dip in the hotel pool. Word of warning though, it was so cold, so it was a really quick dip. The next day was unfortunately our final day before we had to fly home. We began the day by venturing further along Fisherman's Wharf to Pier 39 to see the famous sea lions. The kids loved watching them play and fight in the water, and we could have stayed here all morning. However, we had a reservation for entry to the Walt Disney Family Museum to make. We jumped in our car and made the short drive over to the Presidio, and we were able to get parked fairly easily on the street outside. We'd wanted to visit this museum for years, and it didn't disappoint. As big Disney fans, we found the museum absolutely fascinating. The kids, I think, were less taken with it though. There were some exhibits they could enjoy, but they were perhaps less engaged than we'd expected and just wanted to rush around. Nevertheless, we'd really recommend this and would love to return. Remember to check opening times, as the museum isn't open every day of the week. There was also a Jungle Book exhibit while we were there, which was really interesting and a brilliant shop. After spending a few hours here, one of the staff members recommended the new Outpost playground around the corner. This is part of the new Presidio Tunnel Tops Park and is a great place to let the kids blow off some steam, as well as see some great views back across to the Golden Gate Bridge. It's worth keeping in mind that the bridge is often covered in fog, as you can see here, but we were really lucky to have got some great pictures the day before. To round off the morning, we nipped over to Lucasfilm down the road to get a quick picture at the Yoda fountain, and then we stopped at the Palace of Fine Arts for a quick wander around. Both were quick and easy stops in the car. With our tummies rumbling, we drove back to the hotel to drop off the car and headed back to Pier 39 for lunch at the Hard Rock Cafe. Although a little pricey, we always love a Hard Rock and it didn't disappoint. Having finished lunch, we had a lot more energy and were ready and raring to go. We had another wander around the pier, seeing the sea lions again, and the kids enjoyed a ride on the carousel and did a bit more shopping with the last of their spending money. We decided to spend the afternoon downtown, so we made the short walk to the cable car station at Taylor and Bay. Tickets for the tram aren't cheap, around $100 for the four of us for the day, but they know tourists will pay it as it's a must-do in San Francisco. We hopped on and enjoyed the ride uphill, changing at Nob Hill before riding back down to Drummond, California, near the ferry building. We were able to get outside seats for this part of the journey, which the kids loved, and Greg was able to stand and hang off the side, which he loved, so we all had a great time, enjoying the ride and the views. At the bottom of the hill, we headed across to the ferry building to get some snacks, treats, and spend some time sitting out back, relaxing and enjoying the sun by the water. We then had a wander along the shore to Rincon Park to see the Cupid Span sculpture and for views across the Bay Bridge before heading back on the tram. This time, we hopped off at Union Square for some shopping in Macy's and for tea at the Cheesecake Factory on the top floor. I love a Cheesecake Factory, it has a huge menu and it's really reasonably priced. Conscious we still needed to pack, so we jumped back on the tram to head back down to Fishermans Wharf and to our hotel to get sorted for our flight the next day. There was just enough time for the kids to have one final dip in the freezing cold pool before a well-earned early night. Our flight the next day wasn't until late afternoon, so we had a relaxed morning, enjoying breakfast at the hotel and wandered to Fisherman's Wharf and Musee Mecanique. This is free to enter and contains loads of old amusement arcades and games to enjoy. Our main reason for visiting was to see the arm wrestling game featured in the Princess Diaries, which Eva and I loved seeing, but we spent a really fun 30 minutes or so playing with some of the games. With our luggage packed up, there was time for one more stop on the way to the airport, at the viewpoint at the top of Twin Peaks on the way out of San Francisco. Unfortunately, the fog had other ideas, but we're told on clear days there are amazing views across the city from up here. So that covers our time in San Francisco. I'll talk through some of the more practical aspects of our road trip in a separate vlog, but here I'm going to talk about some of the planning tips for San Francisco in particular. First of all, how we decide to spend our time. As I mentioned, Greg and I had been to San Francisco before, so we'd already seen a lot of the main sites. Therefore, this trip, we wanted to see some of the things we didn't have time for last time, while also showing the kids the best of the city. One of the main sites we left out this time was Alcatraz. We loved visiting the island last time and it's a must-do if you're in the city. Ferries leave from Fisherman's Wharf area over to this famous prison and the tour is fascinating. However, given we'd already done it before, we gave the kids the option of visiting and they decided against it. We still think they'd have enjoyed it though, so maybe we'll try again next time. A bay cruise by itself is also a lot of fun, as is climbing Coit Tower, but we decided to leave both of these out again this time. Golden Gate Park was another site on our list for this trip, but we ran out of time in the end. This is a lovely area with loads to do as a family, including a Ferris wheel, a carousel, a windmill and real live bison to see. A baseball game was also something we considered with the stadium, Oracle Park, being so central. However, we couldn't manage to squeeze it in this time. It's something we'd really recommend though, as the stadium is in a fantastic location with views of the bay from the top tiers. And finally, another place we'd really recommend, although not necessarily with kids, is the Top of the Mark, a lounge at the top of the Mark Hopkins Hotel on Nob Hill with amazing views over the city. Greg and I had a champagne brunch here when we visited last time to celebrate our engagement, but we decided it probably wasn't one for the kids this time. Outside of the city, one of the big things we wanted to fit in but couldn't was the Silicon Valley and Palo Alto areas. These sit out past the airport between here and San Jose, but within day trip distance. We would have liked to have spent some time exploring, seeing the Facebook, Apple and Google headquarters as well as Stanford University, but we'd probably needed an extra day to fit this in. In terms of driving in San Francisco, we were a little bit apprehensive about this beforehand, having heard it wasn't particularly easy or advisable, but we actually managed fine. Parking was expensive and we wanted to avoid parking on the streets or on any steep hills, so we researched parking lots in advance. We used our car for visiting the Presidio and for driving in and out of the city, but then we mainly used public transport within the city. It's worth noting there were lots of signs up around the city and in parking areas warning of thieves and car break-ins, and we'd heard anecdotally that this was a problem in San Francisco too. Therefore, it's worth keeping this in mind. This brings me on to safety. We've visited San Francisco twice now and have never felt unsafe. Having said that, on both occasions we've noticed large homeless population, and on this trip alone we saw hard drugs being used on the streets 3 times. Not something we want to be anywhere near as a family. It wouldn't put us off visiting again, as San Francisco is an absolutely wonderful city, but it's worth just being aware of your surroundings and the areas you're visiting, particularly with children. And finally, costs. As I mentioned, our main cost was the hotel, which was around $900 for the 3 nights, plus around $150 for parking. In addition, we paid around $100 for our tram tickets and pre-booked our movie tour before we went for around £170. The Walt Disney Family Museum was $110. The rest of our spending money, including food, parking, souvenirs, etc., was covered by our usual budget. We normally allow for around £200 per day on a trip like this for the 4 of us. So that's our trip to San Francisco. We hope this was useful for your trip, and if you've got any questions or any other tips, please let us know in the comments below. We'll be adding more vlogs covering our California road trip in the coming months, so make sure to like and subscribe if you'd like to see more from us. Thank you so much for watching.